Well, consultancy firm PwC is again being pushed to release the names of everyone who was involved in the tax leak scandal. It comes as a long-awaited report into the federal government's use of consultants has recommended increased transparency when firms are contracted by the Commonwealth. For more on this, I'm joined by Labor Senator Deborah O'Neill, who chaired the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services. Deb, good to see you. First of all, can I just ask you more broadly?
Good morning.
It was always accepted that they call it the Chinese walls in these consultancy firms, that you could do, work...
or sterile corridors, that was the other term.
Yeah, well, whatever. We can use both terms, but also that they're doing work, they can do work for government and they can do work for the private sector, and there was never a crossover. Since this PwC scandal and your report, do we now accept that that can't happen?
I don't think anybody believes that. We've been reassured and reassured and reassured, but we've had these multinational conglomerates land into the public service and take up a huge amount of space, really take an awful lot of money from the Australian public purse and walk away with profit. And at the same time as they're in there doing that and taking advantage of it, they're building further networks for the next bit of work. So this report that landed yesterday is actually not from the committee that I chair, although that work continues into PwC. This one is from the F&PA committee of the Senate, which looks at finances and public accounts and make sure that public administration, to make sure that we're actually getting value for money. So it's not just about the big four accounting companies, which are going to continue to be scrutinised in the Corporations Committee. This one was really about every contractor, every consultancy that actually interacts with the federal government being required to be held to very, very, very different standards than what we've seen so far. And it's about procurement. Every dollar that you and I send to Canberra as a taxpayer needs to work hard. And if a company, whether it's a small mum and dad company that's providing a consultancy or contracting service, or it's one of the largest multinationals like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Accenture, all of them are captured in this set of 12 recommendations, which were unanimously agreed by the committee.
Well, what would fundamentally change? Because these are high-paying contracts. It's necessary work. There's an acknowledgement now that not all of this work can be done within the department. So what changes? Is it just transparency?
Well, critically, transparency is a part of it, letting sunlight in so that we can actually see what's going on in there and prevent these sorts of behaviours that.
But what does that
really
mean? Like transparency on just the contract that you're contracting at the time, or are you talking about transparency across the entire companies? I mean, that would seem like the long, big arm of government getting into the private sector.
So this really is going to the procurement dimensions, which is about the contracts, Laura. So if you're going to tender and you're going to work for your country's government, there's going to be a very clear set of expectations in the contracts to make it clear that there is a duty of anybody engaging, no matter how big or small, to act in the public interest. Of course, profit making is a really important part of incentivising people, creating innovation, it creates jobs, it makes businesses sustainable. But what we've seen is basically these huge conglomerates, and not just in Australia actually, all around the world, getting in a process called land and expand and just lining themselves up for job after job after job after job, which you can do if conflict of interest doesn't upset your sense of ethics. And that's sadly what we've documented. So, duty to act in the public interest and to make sure that the taxpayer gets value for money. They're critical aspirational things and dimensional things that need to be in contracts. But to make sure that happens, two really critical recommendations. One of them is to make sure that we do something about the self-regulation of these consultancies. Some of them have no professional body at all, but ones like the Audit and Accounting, they have places like CANS, Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. We've really found them wanting in terms of their proper supervision. So one of the recs is to provide, through the Corporations and Financial Services a way to make sure that those professional organisations are doing their bit in the ecosystem. And then critically, if it's over $15 million, if we're building a road, for example, we've got the Public Works Committee that looks at that and makes sure we are getting value for money. And we're suggesting that something similar should happen, not just for the physical investments of the country, but for the knowledge investments in a knowledge economy that we're growing. So they're two critical changes, and then reporting from the Finance Minister about contracts that are over $2 million and where they've changed. So very practical, implementable recommendations to make sure we don't get taken for a ride.
Well, they are practical as long as they don't slow down the processes unnecessarily, and those roads that you speak of, you know, take years or months more to get built. I note that you're also pursuing names. Why are you still pursuing names from PwC? Isn't that a bit of a witch hunt at this point? And in that, don't you acknowledge that this was perhaps more of a cultural issue than individuals acting alone?
I think what we've actually uncovered here in Australia is quite extraordinary in terms of reveal about how these international conglomerates that are partnership models share information amongst themselves, and how they have set up structures to prevent scrutiny by governments. It's not just Australia that's involved in this. When Peter John Collins took that confidential information from the Australian government back, he didn't just share it with his colleagues here in Australia. He plugged it into their network across the globe. And what we know now is Mr Burrows, who's been imposed on the Australian PwC entity, has access to all of his colleagues that he worked with internationally, but he's still refusing to provide us with a report.
But what if you had those names internationally? I mean, what could you do with them anyway? Put them on a blacklist?
Well, it's not just for us, Laura. It's about, these are senior people in one of the biggest entities in the world that is responsible for reporting in such a way that the functioning of the markets can occur. I mean, happily, every Australian has superannuation, and every decision that's going to be made about where your super's invested, whether it's your own self-managed super fund or a retail fund or an industry fund, everybody who's making decisions relies on the truth-telling that's part of this ecosystem. Now, if we've got international partners from PwC across the globe who are not doing the right thing, who are sitting on this information, who are pretending that they didn't have anything to do with it, the risk of their continuing behaviour is still in the ecosystem. It's not just for Australia, it's international. And I don't think it stands the test of Australia's national interest to have a multinational corporation saying, look, I'm the new CEO in Australia, but sorry, I can't help you get this information. It's locked away in a company in England. We can't get it. That is just disrespectful.
All right, well, let us know how you go. I reckon you're probably going to have a pretty hard time getting those names at this point, but an important inquiry and report nonetheless.
We've gone to the English.
Through it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Laura.